Okay, I think we will get started. And welcome to my latest webinar. I'm going to talk to you about the tools. And there's a great line here that I have from Tolstoy, who I also love. I used to be an English teacher, so I bring all my metaphors in that way. And it's all happy families resemble one another. They're alike. But each unhappy family, the dysfunctional family, is unhappy in its own ways. And so we're going to move on. So what are we going to cover today? I always start this way. Understanding the dysfunctional family system, because I'm going to talk a lot about family systems, because that's what this is really about, that you must enter to get care for the elders. It's a very, very precarious, and understanding the 11 warning signs that you're working with a dysfunctional family, because you got to know it in order to deal with it, or maybe move it to another person in your agency. And I'll talk about that. How you master the vital clinical tools to solve client problems. And a lot of you are not, you're not clinicians. You're OTs, PTs, you're clinicians in your own field, but you did not study like social work or, psychiatric interventions. So this is really what it takes to do this. So how to recognize that you've got a dysfunctional family on your hands. And the 6 steps professionals must take to work with these difficult or dysfunctional families. And then how to get care for family members when the dysfunctional families resist, and they always resist. They hire you, but they don't want you there. Okay, so we'll move to the next one. Thank you, James. Okay, so why can I do this? I always do it. I wrote the Handbook of Geriatric Care Management, if you can believe it, 30 years ago. And it's now out in its 4th edition, but I didn't really write it by myself. There are many, many people whose shoulders I stand on here who contributed to this book over the years. And Emily Saltz is one of them, because I knew a lot about the dysfunction. I knew a lot about family systems before I came to geriatric care management, because I actually lived in I lived next door to Gregory Bateson, who actually discovered family systems when he worked in the VA in Menlo Park, and he worked along with a woman named Virginia Satir. And I was exposed to their therapies by kind of knowing them. But I knew them, I wasn't a care manager. And so when I went by a class Emily was teaching, and I was like, oh my God, I want to do that. So a lot of what I'm going to present to you came from Emily Saltz. And care managers working with the aging family is actually the clinical book. It is, and don't quit your day job about writing. I'm not going to make a lot of money on this, or hardly anything. However, this is the book to really get clinically. And a lot of the chapters in here, and I'm going to refer to them, are written by my good friends like Bunny Dibness, I think she's even here, and Leonie Nowowitz. And we worked together. A lot of us, I didn't write Bunny's chapter with her. Steve Barlam did. He's like a great guy and knows family systems as well. He went to Berkeley at the same time I did. But this is a great book, and I'd highly recommend it. And then Mom Loves You Best, the worst offenders in the aging family are the siblings. They just wreak havoc on your care plan. And I wrote a book about that. And then the only manual in geriatric care management. So we'll move on. So we're going to launch into this, understanding the dysfunctional aging family system. And this is really about family systems, and I'm going to explain more about that, because everything's in a system. And you actually have to enter the family system or the family itself to really change their ways of doing things and get care for the older person. You're not a therapist. You're never a therapist. You work with a continuum of care to, get psychiatric or counseling for the family. However, your job is to get care for the older person, and the family blocks you. They really block you, and so you need to go in and help them be able to deal with this. And usually the way they deal with it, because it's all about the pain of nurturing when they were children, really comes from that. And the way they get even with mom at the end is financial abuse and, taking inheritance ahead of time. So we're going to launch into the next slide. And what is the dysfunctional family? So the dysfunctional aging family. Well, it's usually multiple generations infected by the same dysfunction. So it is passed on from generation to generation to generation. The manifestations are alcoholism, substance abuse, that leads to violence, and violence is a key of that as well. Alcohol and substance abuse are really symptoms, but at the same time, what they're blocking is pain. I'm not making an excuse for it. They create themselves as bad parents by drinking and taking pills and, whatever drugs they're taking. But, they are, the family is experiencing pain from no nurturing when they were young. That's really what it's all about. And in a family system, there's seniors, adult children, grandchildren. They all have the same barrier from prohibiting nurturing. And that's really what's going on in the aging family. And the dysfunctional aging family is really characterized by ambivalence. And what's the ambivalence? They love and they hate their family. I worked for many years for the Division of Youth and Family Services and work with foster children. No matter what, those kids, no matter what the parents did, they wanted to go back to them. So there's always a draw to your parent. You love them and you hate them. And that's really true in the aging family. And then a lack of nurturing. And we will come back to that over and over again. And the problem is, there's a little nest here, you can't see it, but the family nest has been rickety. And a lot of the siblings fell out, or they didn't get enough worms, just like birds. There was not enough sustenance or nurturing. And if there's not enough nurturing or sustenance, the chickens come back to roost. The birds come back to roost. And in the aging family, the adult children wreak havoc. And in part, it's because they have no model for care. They have no model because they weren't cared for. They don't know how to care for another person, especially someone who never cared for them. So we'll move on to the next slide. So what's a family system? And this is really important. This is systems theory. We're all in a family system, but we're all in systems. The United States is a system, okay? And what has to happen in the family system is that there has to be succession. And you saw that yesterday. Yesterday, we moved from one president to another president. But the previous president had not been liked. And half the country wanted to move to this succeed to this new president, half didn't. But that's very much like the aging family. When the older person in the family system, is ill because of, Alzheimer's, whatever, they're unable to be the titular head. And even being the titular head, they can be dysfunctional. The dysfunctional family does not know how to change and have succession, move on to a new queen bee. And I'm using a beehive here. And like a beehive, if something happens to the queen, the whole hive goes crazy because they have to change, because systems hate to change. Every single system, the family system, the system of our country, the system of your state, on and on and on. Nobody likes to change. You don't like change. And so, and why they're interdependent, I'm going to explain that next. But that's really what's going on with a system. Systems theory is, when I mentioned Gregory Bateson, that was really developed by he and his team at Menlo Park, VA, in the 50s. So we'll move on. So when grandma and grandpa get disabled and, broken hip, et cetera, what happens is, and this is why a system is interdependent, if one part of the system breaks down, the whole system has to change. Again, they hate it. And just think of an engine, maybe, like an older engine. There were all sorts of parts in it like there are in a new, but it's not run, my older car is not run by a computer. And so if one part breaks down, the car stops. You can't drive anymore. And so you have to come in and fix that one part and maybe a lot of other parts and get it running. That's what I mean about it interdependent. So if one part, especially a major part of the family system, breaks down, then the whole system really can't change. And what do I mean by change? In my metaphor of a car, it can't drive. And so you want the family to drive on. So what it has to do is reorganize, have that, broken part, and it's usually the titular head, even if it's a drunken titular head. A titular head has to be replaced, hopefully with a sober new leader. And why do you need a new leader in the family? Because you don't need everybody telling you what to do. You really need one person in the family kind of leading the family on. And you want the family to have a head of the family. And what happens is, as I say, they resist. They can't change because they don't know how to change. And so what you have to do as a geriatric care manager is enter that family and help them change. And that's what we're really going to talk about. And we'll move to the next slide. Because all systems hate change. They hate to change. And they hate to reorganize to, move on to a new titular head. And you can see that in just what happened yesterday. I mean, total chaos. What happened? There was an insurrection. Essentially the Capitol was broken into by a ton of people. That is the resistance to change in a system. It's just like a family. And instead, what happened was that, the system kept going on. It went on that night to, move the old leader out and essentially get ready to move a new leader in. And that's very much like a family, because systems really have the same sort of trajectory. And in a dysfunctional family, they're so impaired by all the, generations of bad parenting and bad nurturing. They have a really, really, really hard time changing. And you can see in our federal government, we've had, even though we've had a lot of difficulty, we've always had an easy succession in, the past leader into the new leader. But we really had a horrible time in the last 2 weeks. It was the first time that our system resisted. I mean, the Civil War is another example of that, but the resistance still, Lincoln actually, moved on to get, I also taught history. You can get all my background here. So we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, what are the warning signs that you need to know about, that you've got a dysfunctional family on your hands? Because many of you do not have a psychosocial or a psychiatric background. And if you don't, it's a really good thing to have another care manager in your agency that can do that. So if you have a larger agency, you're not a solo practitioner, then you can hire another geriatric care manager to take over these. Hold on, Pete, stop. Peter?
Yes.
Stop walking by here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Repairing.
I'm in my house. That's my husband being crazy. So at any rate, basically that's one way to do it. If you're a solo practitioner and you don't have a psychosocial background, what you can do is delegate out. I mean, refer out to LCSW or someone in the community, or actually Nina Herndon, who's a geriatric care manager that a lot of you know, actually, had someone who consulted with her staff on, on clinical issues. See, there's a lot of ways you can do this. So you want to know right ahead of time what do you have in this family, because you're going to make the most money of any family as a geriatric care manager dealing with these people, these kind of families, because they take a ton of work, a ton of hours on your hand. But you've got to know how to handle them, how to work with them, how to get care for them, or they're probably going to quit. So what's the first sign? It's contentiousness. Old fights erupt all the time in the dysfunctional family. Arguments, and it's usually about old issues, who mom loved best because there was so, little love in the nest. You hit me when you were 3 and I've never forgotten it. And so I'm going to take your money out of the inheritance. These things happen all the time. And, the main thrust of, this contentiousness is mom loves someone else best and the lack of nurturing. But it comes out often in fiscal abuse, in money and inheritance. And we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, another warning sign is anger. Anger and physical abuse, emotional abuse, and financial abuse. And there's usually a long history in the dysfunctional family of one of these. What happens is that in the aging family, the older person is dying and inheritance is really up. So it's a time that many adult siblings in the family see to get even. They don't really look at it like that, but they feel like they're owed it. And there's usually a whole history of chicanery and, probably illegal behavior that they've seen in the family before. So that's another thing that you need to contend with. And there's a history of blaming, and blaming is something that, goes on and on and on in these families. They don't take responsibility. The individuals in the family do not take responsibility for what they do. And this could be, and I'm going to use the Trump family often here, not in a political way at all, but because I'm very interested in their family, interested in family therapy, and I've read a lot about their family in the last few years. So you can see in Mr. Trump blaming, and we'll move on. Distancing and cutoff is another a very, very important sign that you've got a dysfunctional family on your hands. And what does that mean? So many people have done this. It's pulling away and having nothing to do with the family because there's been some offense that one part of the family feels like they can't talk to the other part. And it can happen with the siblings. It can happen not talking to the parent, or it can happen not talking to, both the siblings and the parent. And just to give you an example, and I'm going to use examples from television, literature, and real time. Jennifer Aniston had a mother who was highly critical of her and held her by, an almost, untenable standard. And so she cut her mother off for 10 years. And eventually she went through forgiveness therapy, and which is one thing that you can do, and I'll talk about that, and realized her mom was just doing the best she could. She was married to Brad Pitt, and Brad Pitt had a habit of marrying cut off wives. And he was married to Angela Jolie, and she didn't talk to her father again for, I think, 10 years. And the way that she resolved this is that she realized that, Angela Jolie has a lot of children adopted and the children that she's had. And she realized that her children didn't perceive her father at all like that, that they really loved him and that she needed to reconcile with him. And then a third person is Donald Trump Jr. Now, Donald Trump Jr., after Donald Trump Sr. left his first wife, Donald Trump Jr. was a younger man, and he was really offended by, what happened to his mother. He did not talk to his dad. He cut him off for 10 years. There's cut off. These are just famous people that did it, but it happens with, not people that aren't known at all the time. And I'll move to the next slide. Okay. Another warning sign is called fusion. And fusion is really blending your personality into usually your parent, where the parent and the daughter, or the father and the son, or vice versa, take on the same traits. And Donald Trump Jr. is actually another example of this. As I said, he had his own independent personality and cut off his dad, and then reconciled with him, went back into the business, and now has a very similar personality to his dad. He was married to a woman, and they had 5 children. And he just divorced her for the governor of California's ex-wife. He's very similar to his dad now, at the point of really risking going to prison, which is very sad. And we'll move to the next slide. Another sign of a dysfunctional family is denial. And this is when adult children, you just don't see the decline in their parent. They don't face reality because they're not really grounded in reality. And they don't take care of the parent when the parent needs care. Now, part of this is, really, honestly, not, they don't know how to care for someone who didn't care for them, which is a major sign of, a dysfunctional family and something that really happens in the family. But as far as geriatric care managers are concerned, in denial, the family member, in not really being, in the here and now about what the older person needs, will object to spending money on the care for the older person. Denying the care and not wanting to spend money on you, the geriatric care manager, and also on home care. In which case, the resource that you really, have to consider is adult protective services. And we'll move to the next slide. Another warning sign is triangulation. And triangulation is really tension between 2 family members who align themselves, usually the siblings, against another sibling. So it's 2 against 3, and they gang up on the third. And usually if the two family members don't want to spend the money on the cost of care for the mom because they want to take it for themselves, they will gang up on the first one and stop them from getting care. And triangulation, happens all the time in large families. I once worked with a family with a woman who was in a nursing home, and she was, just frozen in place. And 6 of the kids, is a really true story, said they just wanted to let her die. The other 6 said that there was something going on with her, and they knew that she was trying to communicate. And I ended up being the conservator. And so I had this wonderful nurse who went in and diagnosed her, even though the doctors had done it. And she had locked-in syndrome. She actually was trying to communicate. And so we were able to convince the doctors, the nurse was, of course, and she actually went home. She still had locked-in syndrome. So, this kind of rivalry in the siblings and, objecting to care, et cetera, happens all the time. So we'll move to the next slide. The 11th warning sign is a sense of entitlement, and you are dealing with entitled people. And if you have a history of me watching my YouTube channel or taking a class with me or watching webinars, You know, I say this over and over again. You cannot deal with any group of people except the entitled upper 10%. Now, I don't like that at all, but we don't have Medicare for all, which I really wish we did, nor are we like most of the Western civilizations and countries all over the world that have national care. So that, you know, people have to pay for care in our society, and home care is $4,000 to $6,000 a year. So the only people that you really can, you know, afford, because home care is really expensive. Home care manager is not that expensive, but with care management comes home care. So these are the people you have to deal with, and these are who they are. There's 4 categories, and I really got this from Claudia Fine, another person who's, you know, who I stand on her shoulders. She has a great chapter on entitled, she and Nick Newsom, who's a great guy too, a chapter in Care Managers Working with the Aging Family on the entitled family and how to deal with this. This is Claudia's advice. So she divides them into 4 kinds of entitled families. There's first just the rich, and there's Mrs. Astor, and Mrs. Astor was one of the world's most wealthy people, at least, you know, in the United States. She lived to be 104. She was a terrible mother, and she was a nice person, but, you know, she only had 1 kid, and that kid was sent off to boarding school when he was in 1st grade. Didn't get out of boarding school really until 12th, and then he went off to college. So he didn't feel like he was nurtured. And she lived to be 104, and when she got to be about 100, she was a very, you know, long-lived and very active person. She started to fall apart. And the son started embezzling. He became the conservator, the power of attorney for finances, started taking all of her money and her favorite painting. So you can't make up what happens to these people. Mrs. Astor, finally, her friends took all this to court, and Oscar de la Renta's wife became the conservator. It was a great scandal in the New York society. And there is a wonderful book about her. I'm going to be giving you a full bibliography of all the literature and, you know, everything I can think of that you can learn more about this, because I'm not the end all be all. Another one is Nancy Trump. Nancy Trump was really reviled by her 2 children. She was a terrible mother. They were a dysfunctional family. And during the 60s, when her kids were young, they started writing exposés about, you know, her being a terrible mother. Donald Trump, not a good father. He himself, actually, you know, he came from a terrible this highly dysfunctional family himself. And his mom, when she was having her last child, Donald was the second last, had some very serious medical problems, was hospitalized, and was unable to parent him, and he was only 2 years old. They only had a housekeeper. They didn't have a nanny. And so he was taken care of when she wasn't at school by his 10-year-old sister. And so he was really kind of wounded in that. I don't know that that's the answer to Donald Trump's problems, but he himself had, you know, very poor nurturing. And he himself was sent to boarding school because he was such an outrageous teenager. What happens out of this sense of entitlement is that entitled people have demands and expectations based on fantasies. And you can recognize this in Trump because, you know, he demands loyalty, like the mafia, you know, he on fake news. And you know, he's gone now. I'm just saying that, you know, what can I say? He came from a dysfunctional family, and he's a very, very good metaphor for me to use. And this is Mrs. Astor down there. And we'll move to the next slide. Narcissism, the Trumps come here again, is the 11th warning sign. And narcissism is really, it's all about me. Narcissistic parents are, the worst offenders. They have severe boundary issues. You can see this in Trump. He, basically, we have checks and balances in our government, but he really was not interested in using them. And so he, to get what he wanted, he went over the boundaries of federal government, which got, him not elected again. So they have severe boundary issues, and the adult child devalues his children over, or her children over and over again, which happened to Donald Trump himself when he was young. And, actually happened to his 3 children. And what happens is the parent feels superior. And I really got a lot of this, the psychosocial part of it from Claudia Fine. And when I went back and visited it again, because I've taught this many times, I realized one of the things that Claudia brought up that really happens with narcissism is the narcissistic person does not see their children as children. They only see the children as a part of them and the parts that can help him. And you can see this in Trump as well, in that, now all those adult children are in legal jeopardy because they were a part of him. They weren't really his children. So we'll move on. The 11th warning sign is the dysfunctional family. In the dysfunctional family is the adult child is needy, starved for affection. And I've talked about this over and again, because they've been taken care of by nannies, by butlers, by boarding schools, a lot of boarding schools, and they weren't parented well. And nurturing, the body is sustained by blood, our bodies. And without enough of blood, or, essentially we begin to die. And the same in the dysfunctional family. The blood of a the blood of a family is really nurturing. If love is not there, if love is not circulating, if nurturing isn't circulating through the family, then the family becomes dysfunctional and actually, doesn't begin to die. It just passes it on over and over and over again. And so nurturing and the sustenance of nurturing and love are really the baseline cause of this dysfunctional family system. And we'll move on. The 10th sign is the adult child is poorly parented by the dysfunctional aging parent. And so they have no idea. What happens is they have no template for caring. So without a template for caring, they have no idea how to care for the parent. And this is really the rub. They do not know how to care if no one has actually shown them how to do it. And we'll move on to the next sign. The next sign is financial exploitation. And financial exploitation and abuse is rife in the dysfunctional family, and I've talked about that. And that's the family taking money under false pretenses without the older person's knowledge or permission, and denying the older family or person his own funds. And I'm going to give you 3 examples. One is the painter Wilhelm de Kooning. And you may not like modern art, so you don't know anything about him, but he was one of the most prolific and richest painters during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But he developed Alzheimer's, and he was a raging alcoholic. So because of his raging alcoholism, he was a terrible parent. His only daughter, who was not well nurtured, took over during, when he developed Alzheimer's, and began spending lavishly out of his own money without his permission, because he really couldn't make those decisions. And again, just like Mrs. Astor, someone came in, and it wasn't Oscar de la Renta's wife, but the court appointed someone to be the conservator. And this is all an example of fiscal exploitation. The next example I'm going to use is family members using improper arrangements and powers of attorney and conservatorship. And Britney Spears has a lot of mental health problems. She, at some point, had to be conserved, and her father was appointed to the conservatorship. But he embezzled a lot of her money. Now, why am I using these people? Because, you know, in the public domain, they're available to you to really understand, you know, what happens here. And undue influence is really the basis of this. And this is the most important term that you can really understand with fiscal exploitation and actually clinically to see, because this happens all the time in aging families. As I've said before, whether you've ever, you know, worked with me, I worked in Pebble Beach in Carmel, California for 25 years. And then at the same time, I worked in Silicon Valley. So I know the rich and famous and the entitled. And when I was working in Silicon Valley, it was at the time when Silicon Valley was going into the stratosphere about real estate, you know, values. Houses people bought for $20,000 were now like $1 million. And so I started seeing this pattern where alcoholic or drug using sons were moving in with their parents. The parents became disabled and they were taking over in all sorts of bizarre ways, you know, sending their kids to, you know, $1 billion private school with the parents' money. One guy sent the house on fire. And out of that, I really began, and you know, it's when I got really interested again in dysfunctional families. But I started calling it Aging Peter Pan because I saw so many of them, and they were all using undue influence. And that's when an individual who's stronger, meaning the adult child, or it could be, you know, even a stranger. I've had that happen before with, you know, a very lonely person, usually, you know, an isolated older person, and you can see that now with older people sheltering in place, you know, moves toward a very lonely person and starts to take power over a weaker older person, and starts stealing both money and jewelry, et cetera, et cetera. And that's undue influence. And that's something that you need to know, because if you see that, you're a mandated reporter. So are banks. And so the resource in the community you need to use is Adult Protective Services. And you need to know that. And Mrs. Astor's son was another example of that. Adult Protective Services came in New York, and he actually went to jail. I don't know exactly what happened to Britney Spears' father. I don't think he went to jail. We'll move on to the next. Okay, how do concierge clients present? How do they act when you meet them or you're doing an inquiry? This is again from Claudia Fine, who is a great friend of mine, because we started doing care managers together, and we all had little kids. They approach you with a sense of urgency. You know, they're just like, you know, they need to solve this now, and they're not really nice about their urgency. They expect you to take their call right away. That gives you a total clue of who they are. They are calling wildly to get their needs met all over the place, not just to you, but to other agencies. So they're shopping around for help. And their relationships with you, the geriatric care management and the agency, is conflictive, always conflictive. And they are demanding, you know, they want you to do it right away. They don't have boundaries, and they have intense emotional reactions, as you can see Mr. Trump or former President Trump having right here. And we'll move to the next slide. The hallmarks of the dysfunctional family. They're conflictive, as I just said, rather than compatible. And the nearly normal family, I always, you know, there's no normal family, the nearly normal family. The nearly normal family is compatible. And you can see that yesterday in the, in the inauguration, Joe Biden has a nearly normal family. According to the grandchildren, he calls them all the time, and if they don't answer, he calls and calls and calls until they call them back. It's a tight Irish family, and that is compared to Kamala Harris, who has a compatible family, but she has an extended family. She never had children. She has 2 stepchildren. The ex-wife is really, happily a part of the family. And then she has a large family herself. They're people of different colors, but they work together, and you can see them. They were all walking down, the street during the inauguration. So they're compatible, and the dysfunctional family is always conflicted. The dysfunctional family is fragmented, as I've said in many of the other slides, rather than the nearly normal family. The nearly normal family is cohesive. The dysfunctional family is non-productive, meaning they can't move to change. They can't move a new titular head of the family in. They can't move to get care for the older person. Where the nearly normal family, they're thrown off by, the need for care for the older person, but they can be righted by a little bit of care management, and then, they get care. They just do fine. They've been caring all along, but the other collapse of, the older person needing, private care brings them to you, the geriatric care manager. The dysfunctional family is fragile. They're very fragile. They're tough on the outside, but inside they're just a mess. They're grieving. They have not had enough love. And they're rather than stable, because nearly normal families have had, stability throughout their life. Dysfunctional families are very rigid. They can't change. As all family systems have a hard time changing, or all systems have a hard time changing, this family cannot move on. They are what Bunny Dibnah says, stuck. And, your job is to go get them unstuck. And we're going to talk about that in interventions, clinical interventions. So they're not flexible like the nearly normal family. With a crisis in parent care, meaning the parent needs care, at some point, the nearly normal family will lock arms together to get care, where the dysfunctional family goes to war with each other instead of changing. And you can see the little illustration down there, because in the end, the dysfunctional family can't collaborate. They can't work together as a team. So we'll move to the next slide. More warning signs. They blame others, and they make no responsibility for their actions. And you can see this in President Trump. During COVID, one of his famous lines was, they asked him, was he responsible for, now 430,000 dead being dead, and it's going to be 4,000, I think, 300 or 400 today. And it's going to be 400,000 by the end of this month, by the end of February. And asked if he, could take any responsibility for this, and he said no, it wasn't my fault. And he, does not take responsibility for, anything. Not took responsibility for the insurrection, even though now he's being impeached for a second time. So they blame others, and they don't take responsibility. They blame you, and you need to be a tough cookie to take care of these families, because you have to be very sure of yourself in your own person and in your own skills as geriatric care manager, because they will blame you for things that you're done, because that's how they know to push everyone away and keep themselves insular and in charge. They have unrealistic expectations of the elderly relative, and I talked about that. And, they don't get care for them, soon enough, or sometimes not at all. because the blaming keeps pain away from them psychosocially. And then they'll try to fire you. And that's why you have to have a great big deposit with these people, because they will try to fire you, and they will fire you if you don't do what they like, or you do something that, you know, is a real skill of a geriatric care manager, but they didn't want you to do that. They don't want, you know, they don't want to change. They don't want to listen to you. So they'll try to fire you, and this is the risk you take in taking on the case. And Claudia and Nick Newcomb, this great guy, wrote this chapter in Care Managers Working with the Aging Family and Working with this Dysfunctional Family, and I would highly recommend getting that book and reading it. They argue with everyone constantly, and another example of Trump. And in big decisions, like I said, they don't lock arms. They just pit themselves against each other. And we'll move to the next slide. So why are they calling you and driving you nuts? The adult child from the normal family must begin to care for the parent who cared for them. But the adult child in the abnormal, dysfunctional family was poorly cared for. So they have to start caring for someone who didn't care for them. And that's really a row to hoe. I mean, you have to have total compassion for them at that point. They have no template for caring. So both families face what you call a filial crisis. And this is a major clinical term that you really need to go into and learn about. And you can learn it in Care Managers Working with the Aging Family. There's a whole chapter on loss and dysfunction by myself and Leonie Nowowitz, who was really a genius with this stuff, about the filial crisis. Because even though there's tons of literature out there, there are, you know, blogs, TV shows, I mean, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there about needing parent care, but still the dysfunctional family ignores it. They pretend it's not there. And when it, you know, it comes to them, they really have to care. They completely freak out and they do not move to get care for the older person. Or if they do, they deny it and drive you crazy as a geriatric care manager. The dysfunctional aging child has a filial crisis because, again, the parent who never cared for them, they need to care for. They need to nurture, and they do not know how to nurture. Nobody taught them. And we'll move to the next slide. Okay, clinical skills. Now we're going to get into the tools that you really need to solve these problems. The first one is assessment skills. And every one of you who are a geriatric care manager, any kind of aging professional, need to really have assessment skills. And what I always say is you're very much like a doctor. The doctor does a lot of tests. They, you know, listen to your lungs. They check your oxygen with that funny thing they put on the end. They do blood tests. They may do even more serious tests. Their tests are your assessments. And what they get out of all their tests are a diagnosis. Their diagnosis is your care plan. So assessments are really important. And a geriatric assessment, you know, is available, you know, how to write one, how to do one is available in the Handbook of Geriatric Care Management. But there are many, many, many more assessments. There's a depression assessment. There's many mental or mentation assessments. There's a moving assessment if you have somebody who's going to move. There's death and dying assessments. So you have to have all these tools, which are essentially tests to a doctor, to be able to come to your care plan. So that's your first line of a tool. And we'll move on. The next tool is essentially a written geriatric assessment, because lots of times in this dysfunctional family, you will end up in court, not you personally, but the family will be, you know, so, you know, embroiled in legal difficulties, like you could see in de Kooning, you could see in Mrs. Astor, You could see in so many, Britney Spears, they're all in court in conservatorship. Your geriatric assessment is actually, it's legally evidence. And so you can, make a lot of money in your practice by working with elder law attorneys who actually get it. There was an elder law attorney involved in Mrs. Astor's case. And, by marketing to elder law attorneys, you can do this. But what you have to come up with is not just a verbal, a geriatric assessment that you wrote down. It's a written geriatric assessment. And Phyllis Brostoff, who's, again, I've worked with since she had little kids and I had little kids, and we're all retired together. I'm not really retired. I still do this. But I do play with them a lot. We once went to when we could do it, we went to a dude ranch with about 10 of us, 15 of us. It was great. So you have to learn how to write a geriatric assessment that can go to court. And this has to be really, really, really well written without any mistakes. And there's a rhyme or reason to it. And Phyllis really knows how to do that. And I collaborated with her. So you have to come up with the power dynamics in the family. That's identifying roles and conflicts. You have to know, you have to have a care plan where you can teach, you can come up with two-way nurturing of the child and parent, which is a skill in itself in geriatric care management, a tool, and, a way to establish boundaries and offer caregiver support and education. And that usually passing that on to the conservator, or, in the East, it's, just called a fiduciary, and we can move on. So that's a really good tool. Another tool is arranging a family meeting. And family meetings are really, really important, and it takes a lot of skills to do them. Care manager can be a facilitator. They can't be a mediator. But you can facilitate a family meeting with a dysfunctional family if they're not, as Bunny Didma says, so stuck, you're not going to be able to change them at all. So you can, what I would suggest is, since if you have psychosocial and clinical and psychiatric skills, you can do this. But if you are like a lot of people in my classes, your OTs, PTs, your background is technology, your background is business, then I would either, as I said, have someone on your staff who has all these tools, or then you can invite, if you're just doing facilitation, not mediation, you can invite an LCSW into the family meeting, of course, with a HIPAA, compliant HIPAA form signed, to have this family meeting, because the family meeting has very specific agendas to follow. And there's a great chapter in handbook in Care Managers Working with the Aging Family about how to run a family meeting anywhere, even in the corner of the hospital, by Rita Gottok. Really well-known geriatric care manager who started the first care management agency in a hospital at Stanford Hospital. And she wrote the chapter, because you have to sit down with a family and basically divide tasks, because usually only one family member is doing all the care. It's usually the woman, usually the oldest child, oldest woman. You have to be able to divide tasks, to delegate out, and you have to delegate jobs fairly, because the one care provider can't take it on. And you have to diffuse family bombs, because what will happen in these family meetings is they'll always defer back to the past, and you have to keep them in the future. You have to be able to create an agenda. You have to, at the end, take all the notes and then send them to everybody in the family to sign off, because they will say, I never said that. And in that chapter, all of that is outlined. And we'll move to the next slide. And you can set up a mediation meeting. Now, you are not a mediator, and in the Handbook of Geriatric Care Manager, there's an excellent chapter on what's the difference between a geriatric care manager and a mediator, written by Dana Curtis, who is an attorney and does excellent mediation. She's out of Marin. And so you really need to understand what's the difference between you and a mediator and when you need to refer to a mediator. And what Dana calls geriatric care managers is accidental mediators. And you need really a professional mediators, because mediators don't come out of the sky. They actually study this for several years and get a credential. And they, and when you think of mediation, really think of divorce, ugly divorces, terrible divorces. The court moves them on to mediation with an attorney that knows this. And so in geriatric care management, we now have geriatric care managers who are mediators and very excellent mediators. And I would interview mediators, and I'm going to use Bunny Dibness, who did sign up for this, little knowing that I was using all her stuff. And the name of her agency is Aging Life Matters, and Bunny's out of Los Angeles, and she deals with like absolutely crazy cases in mediation. It's just really, really beyond the pale, dysfunctional families. And I would highly recommend that. Okay, we'll move to the next slide. Okay, another tool that you can use is what you should know as a geriatric care manager anyway, and that's ongoing monitoring and assessment on all parts of this dysfunctional family, because you have to keep on, monitoring and assessing the elder's needs, because they're in jeopardy with a dysfunctional family. I mean, they could be like not enough food. They can, not only their money gone, but their clothes, their jewelry, and monitor and assess caregivers' needs, because, if they have paid caregivers in there, they can tell you a lot about what's going on, but they can be abused. And monitor and assess the family's needs, because usually one person is abusing the older person. And then, you have the other family members ratting them out. And so, geriatric care management is a collaborative affair. You have to really talk to everybody in the family on a constant basis to really get their version of truth. And then you can, you need to know really in the beginning, who's against who are the roles. And I highly always recommend a genogram. And genograms, are not only, out of ancestry, but there's a psychosocial genogram where the genogram will show you who's against who's the enemy of who. And you really need to know that in the very beginning. And then, because what you want to identify is, power, who has it, who's against who, and then realign it only to get care for the older person and keep them safe. You are not a therapist. You really just need to just manipulate all of these family members in order to get care for the older person. And then you want to, monitor, the quality of life of care for the older person, especially now in the midst of COVID when everybody's sheltering in place, and do a quality of life assessment. And we'll move on. We're back to that good old denial, the river in Egypt. So you want to use the continuum of care in your area and arrange needed services for this dysfunctional family, like you arrange for all families. And it might be, another geriatric care manager who has, more psychosocial and psychiatric LCSW skills. It might be, bringing in counseling, because you're not a therapist. So you shouldn't really be doing counseling, but the family usually needs counseling. So reaching out to MFTs or LCSWs in the area as part of your continuum of care. Using, again, your medical, continuum of care, the doctor and what you want to do is whatever it is, you want the right person, the right professional at the right time and the right place. So you have to know the continuum of care. Psychiatric continuum of care, you've got to know that in your area, because these families have psychiatric difficulties. social, because you're not only just in charge of, getting them stabilized psychiatrically, you're getting in charge of getting joy into their life. And, social and quality of life care is really something that you need to bring in when you're doing all this. And then caregiving needs to be, and the last is one of the most important. Adult protective services is in your continuum of care. And you really need to refer to them if you really see any of these very, very difficult, embezzlement things going on. And you're a mandated reporter. You all need to know that. So are bankers. So if indeed you see any semblance of fiscal embezzlement or taking money or undue influence, you've got to report it right away to Adult Protective Services, or you're in trouble. We'll go to the next one. We're almost done. You can hold a sibling meeting, and this is just a family meeting. It's a sibling meeting to try to get the siblings to work together as a team. Again, your only reason to be there, get care. So you can help the siblings voice overload, and I just talked about that. Usually one sibling is just just dumped all the care on because they're the oldest daughter, or it used to be in most countries that there was a designated daughter and she never got married because it was her job to take care of everyone. Well, here, it's not really, a part of our culture, but it still is a part of our culture that, there's usually a girl that has to take care of it all. And you can help the siblings understand the caregiving system more, and to fairly share care. That's a really good thing to use in a family meeting. And you can do this. You don't need a mediator to come in here. This is part of a care manager's skill. You can help when a daughter's doing it all to get her to verbalize it, because caregivers don't see, family caregivers do not see themselves as caregivers. They see themselves as family. And, they willingly take on all the care. And then, the caregiver often goes under before the person they're caring for. And the family meeting can help tamp down resentment when the siblings are spending money instead of help. And that's okay. If a family member wants to pay for the home care, that's all right. You don't have to show up to be a part of the shared care. So you need to really counsel them in that. And that's all part of the chapter that Rita Gottschalk wrote, and we'll move on. And then, offering another, another clinical skill that you can have is offering ongoing individual coaching to individual warring siblings. And, coaching is a real skill and a clinical skill that you use in geriatric care management. So you can coach siblings toward understanding that family caregiving is a choice, not a requirement. And I had this experience. My dad lived with me for 20 years. And he moved from New Jersey, and he was fine in the beginning, but at the end he needed things like diaper changing. And if something is abhorrent to a caregiver, you need to, help them acknowledge that they don't have to do it. And I really just couldn't do that. Men do not like changing women's diapers. And there's a lot of other things here, but I'm using the extreme here. And I was very lucky that my husband used to be a highway patrolman, and he'd seen all sorts of parts of bodies because that was his job, sadly. And so he took care of my dad, and I was very lucky. But lots of times, you don't have the highway patrolman husband and, ready to go. So that means bringing in caregivers or another sibling that, doesn't feel uncomfortable about that. And, this seems like a really, really, simple thing. Coach siblings to say thank you. Again, when families interact with each other, they just have expectations that you don't say thank you. In this case, when you're sharing care, to, enhance the relationship between the siblings, you got to coach them to say thank you to other siblings who are offering the care. And that's something that you can really do. You can even encourage them to write thank you notes, put it on paper, We never get paper anymore in the mail. I wrote a lot of thank you notes because of that, because people notice it. I like to get letters myself. So thank you notes are a really important thing, really just to get the siblings to acknowledge, the help that they're all getting, and to give more help then. And, to work with long-term childhood wounds. In a sibling meeting, you don't want to go back to the past, but those wounds are there. So you need clinical skills to be able to help them talk about the wounds that they have, or get them to someone in the continuum of care, like an LCSW, or a therapist, or someone that deals with psychiatric, or an MFTs. MFTs are great, and especially MFTs that specialize in aging families, because they know much more. And then forgiveness therapy. Forgiveness therapy is really, really important. And I have a great book on forgiveness therapy by Fred Luskin. And I worked with him as well, because he lives in Santa Cruz. It's a group of writers and therapists in my community. And I worked with him up at Stanford because I was really interested in forgiveness therapy. And, counseling the siblings in forgiveness therapy, because that's eventually what you have to do. And counseling about cutoff. I had my own experience with cutoff. My dad had PTSD because he was in World War II in a German prison camp. And he was not a good father. He was never physical or anything like that, but he just was absent, which is very true of extreme PTSD. So when he came to live with me, and at some point when he was living back in Atlantic City, where I came, I'm a New Jersey girl. I was so mad at him because of what he was doing that I cut him off for a long period of time. And then when I moved him out here and he was older, I realized he was a really good guy. He was a nice person. And I was able to see these two sides of him. And we're going to talk about how you can see these two sides, in clinical terms. And we'll move on to the next slide.
Cathy, excuse me for just a second. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have less than 20 minutes now for questions and answers, and so on. So I just wanted to let you know time-wise where we were standing.
2 more slides. We're done. We're almost done. Okay, so then another clinical step is to counsel sibling therapy and favoritism, and intervening with loading on care, which I already talked about, using the family meeting that I already talked about, and referring out to an LCSW or someone in the continuum of aging. And we'll move to the next slide. And these are the last 2 slides. And this is really important. And I learned this from Emily Saltz. One of the most important clinical things you need to give to these families is to give the family hope. You have to provide always grounded optimism in whatever you are doing. You have to provide that family vision of the future. You have to let them see a hopeful, optimistic future for them to move toward it. You have to be directly empathetic yourself as a geriatric care manager, hopeful, and show them that, and non-judgmental, which means objective. You have to provide the caregiver with a place of safety for them to be able to tell you all the things that were difficult in the relationship with the father. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, and the last one. And then you need to use yourself as a container for their angry, scared, anxious feelings. And I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. And you have to use yourself with the possibility of positive perseverance. And we'll move to the last slide. And this is the most important thing I have to say to you, because these children have 2 parents and you are 2 people, because they have an internalized parent, the parent that was 30 when they were 12, and a parent in the here and now who's old and frail, just like I had with my dad. And you, the child, have this internalized you, the child at 12 who had no power and was feeling like they were abused, and the 55-year-old person in the here and now. And you cling to these internalized you and internalized parents. So the adult child, yourself, needs to move on into the here and now and let go of that 30-year-old, however old they are, abusive parent. And you have to forgive the rights and the wrongs, and understand the wrongs, but forgive them. And this is through forgiveness therapy. And this is where Fred Luskin really comes in, because this is Janus, the two-headed, Greek god, and that's really what happens. So really quickly, we're going to go through this. We'll do the next 3 slides fast. At the end, we're going to skip this. This is core skills. No, I'll go over it really fast. This is from Bunny Dibnus. These are core skills that you really need to use. The first is containment. You have to let them deposit all those unhappy feelings in you. I talked about that. Objectivity, you have to be totally objective. You can't, get mad at them. You have to always be hopeful. And then resources, you have to use all the resources in your community. And expertise, I would not take these families on unless I had 5 years of experience as a GCM and had psychosocial skills. If not, just like I said, hire somebody else. And we'll move on. We're done. Okay, these are the last things I'm going to do. I make offers afterwards, and I'm going to do it really fast. One is my geriatric care management operations manual. For this, I always offer things. You can buy it if you want for $66.99 instead of $8.99 until the 30th for being in the manual. We'll move one more. We'll move through the next one. Skip that. Okay, the second is my GCM operations manual class. You can look at this later. You'll get a copy of that. And that's available for $8.99 instead of $9.95 until the 30th. And if you want it, you have to get in touch with me through that email. And the third, and we're done. I have an online business class as well. And you can read all of this, and you can have it for $5.50 instead of $6.50 if you get in touch with me through this email. And we're done, and we can do questions now.
Oh, thank you, Cathy, for another informative and educational webinar. And thank to the participants and the attendees here today as well for coming in and sharing with us your excellent presentation here. There are a couple of questions here. And Bunny is here, by the way. I'm going to read.
Yay, Bunny! I knew
she's here. But first, let me just do a little housekeeping here regarding a copy of this webinar and other things that might be. How can the attendees get a copy of this? Or you usually send them out email? Is that correct?
Yeah. The wonderful person who's filming this, right, James, will get it up on YouTube, and you hopefully will get it tomorrow. So in the future, you don't even have to come. You just get a copy of it, but it helps.
No. We don't. No. Yes, you need to. Yes, you need to show up, because this is a place where you can ask your questions and
right, exactly.
It's much better live presentation than listening to it.
That's true. That's true.
So let me again remind everybody, if they do have a question, that to put it in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, there a little black pop-up bar that comes up, and you go ahead and type in your question there, and we can go ahead and address it in the next few minutes here. But let me go back up here to a question that was asked earlier on, and this I think refers to getting a deposit up front, I believe. Carlene is asking, with large deposits, do you refund it if they fire you? I have a case that I am considering, and it sounds like it's very dysfunctional. So I guess the question is whether or not you can ask for that or legally get that back, or how that would work.
Well, what you do is when they don't pay you, say they didn't pay you $3,000, you might have a $5,000 deposit and you return $2,000, but that means you didn't get stuck. That's what I'm talking about. And you should always have a deposit, especially if there's caregivers, because that's payroll's huge. But you always want a deposit just in case somebody, and these people will fire you. So yeah, you want a large deposit. And that tells them that they're paying money for this too.
Well, it tells them a couple of things. It tells them that you are a qualified care manager and that is your going rate, so you have, that initial first impression to your potential clients and families there. So you want to, you want to make sure that you live up to your price tag is what you want to do. So let me go ahead and Bunny did, she wrote a longer paragraph here, and so I'm going to go ahead and try to read it. She says, "Hi, Cathy. I love your warning signs for predicting dysfunctional families. As someone who is focusing primarily conflict resolutions for families that are stuck, I have recently added another warning sign. I used to say that if siblings, and this is in quotes, love their parents more than they hated their siblings, unquote, I could help. I have no other category which has brought dysfunction to a whole new level. There are siblings that truly, quote, hate their siblings more than they love their parents, unquote. Conflicts can be resolved, but it puts conflict to an entirely new level. What do you think?" That's something interesting. I've experienced that myself, but just to read it in words, I think is impactful to me to actually feel like that. What are your thoughts?
I would find that typical because, siblings, they can, really reunite against the parent. And because they were all in the rickety nest, they all didn't get enough worms. And so, I think it takes different skills, but they're not geriatric care management skills. Now, Bunny, you have mediation skills. You've studied this. You know much more than I do, which is why I'm referring to you and using your chapters and books. But I would still take it on because I think it's fairly typical. It's not typical. Usually there is one sibling that gets more of the worms. And, then there's a reason to hate the other siblings, for the other siblings to hate that person. But I think that it takes the same skills, but at the same time, it takes changes in the way that you work with them. Now, that's probably a really simple answer, Bunny. And I don't know. If there are people out there that, have different answers, I think that's that's a real conundrum. That's for sure.
I was trying to see if I can get Bunny mic'd up here so we can.
Yeah, Bunny. I was going to ask Bunny if she wanted to be, if she wanted to be a person, like Keith here. I should have asked you, Bunny. Next time I'll ask you. I love Bunny.
I had to see you.
Oh, here you are. Okay, good.
Bunny, yes.
Good.
Okay.
So I want to keep this all moving along here. Buddy, I wanted to ask you a question about this. Is this unusual constellation of family members siding with or hating siblings more than they love their parents? If I'm paraphrasing you correctly, is that a new phenomenon in nuclear families or in families or do you feel like that has been going on? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's been going on since time. We started with Cain and Abel, I guess. But I think, since I've been doing more complicated cases, what I see, it's easier to get stuck because I think I assume it's all care managers out there. We look, whatever we're doing, we're looking at it for the best interest of the parent. And usually when we clear all the muck, it's only 20% they're arguing about. That other 80%, they're all on, they want their parents safe, they want them healthy, they may disagree on where and how much money to spend and who should do it, but they gather in a lot of things. With these siblings, the outcome is not as important as screwing the other sibling. And that can come in anything but wanting to spend money down so the other sibling, kind of like a divorce, they'll spend money down and not have money left over just to spite their other sibling, or they'll put a more burden on them even though they could do things because they want to make their other sibling more miserable. These kinds of things. And that used to really be my tagline, and all of a sudden I have like 3 sets of siblings now. They hate each other, and it's really hard getting through trust documents. And that's what I was called in. A lot of them are illegal because the attorneys were stuck, and a fiduciary was afraid of being sued, and that kind of thing. So I think for the care managers out there, it's something to identify, because you could be doing the best job in the world and have the best options and have the best assessment and care plans. You can't move because their agenda it's not rational of helping their parents. It's really spiting their siblings. So I just thought I'd add it to your list.
Honey, could you move them to a siblings family meeting?
These are siblings that won't even get in the same room, because I've always been beliefs when I've done mediation, it really is giving everybody a voice, and you can't, it is clear that they can't be in the same room together. So it's I forget what they call it, something fancy in mediation. I can't remember what it was, and I said, no, that's attorneys. I'm a family therapist. I'm a care manager. I put everybody to love, kumbaya. These you don't do that with. And ultimately, in a case that took me 3 months to settle and about $20,000 in legal fees more and capacity for a 102-year-old with a daughter. And I had to finally say, I'm a mandated reporter. And if you don't let go of this, I'm reporting you for psychological elder abuse. I don't even know what to do with that exactly. And I don't know what it is, but it got her moving. It was, and I was patient for 3 months, but you have to, I think for newbies, that you have to identify it so you know what you're dealing with. And sometimes you got to take care of it, or you can't get on with your plan, even the best plans. And it's not good for an older person's health. They're not getting their care taken care of. They're not getting the appropriate treatment because you've got these siblings that are dealing with something that has nothing to do with their parents.
Right.
It's a long rippling effect between, so you're trying to resolve the issues between a sibling, and then the effect of that is affecting the parents and the other family members.
As a therapist, and I too, studied family systems, but I'm not doing therapy at all. I just look under that eye. And really encouraging therapy, but people are so grounded in this dysfunction, they don't want to do it. When they're resistant to it, you got to do some real cognitive behavioral stuff to get them moving. So that sort of like what borderline personalities that a lot of that using logic doesn't work.
Well, Bunny, maybe we'll do siblings next time together.
That's fine.
Ooh.
I love those.
Thank you, Bunny. Thank you for adding that extra. Let me ask you the both of you, one more question then. Do you feel it would be important, paramount for new care managers and experienced care managers to recognize these signs when you get to that point of this intense sibling conflict to seek a mediator, to seek other, rather than take it on yourself? Because listening to you and having experienced some of that myself, it bogs you down. It slows you. You're walking through molasses, not only with that case, but with other cases, your time, your energy, your attention, all that is just sucked into this issue here with the sibling. Anyway, would you recommend then recognizing that up front, and maybe if you don't feel you could take it to,
I think if you start with Cathy's warning signs. And
yeah.
I just wrote a blog actually for ALCA, and sometimes you can do it yourself. It's only every sibling doesn't hate each of the other siblings. A lot of them just don't know what they don't know. And that's where care management assessment said, oh, I didn't know I could get in-home supportive services, or I didn't know they'd have to go to a nurse.
Exactly.
So it's a small portion. Believe me, I'm not doing this. I don't have a caseload of millions on this. But when they come to you, you have to recognize it. And like everything else, like, all the other abnormal, like legal issues or medical issues or nutritional issues, those are just, you have to know what you know, and all you have to know is what you don't know. And then I'll pass it on to you, Cathy. It's a simple.
Oh, great. No, I would love it.
Whatever.
I would love it. It's great to see you.
Well, we have a couple more comments here.
Okay.
Along the way, and Lori is a comment. She's commenting that she says, thank you for the presentation, very informative, and it gives a great perspective on how sibling issues can affect caring for an ailing parent. Yeah. And Julie writes, hi Cathy, I'm a conservator for a 90-something woman, the attorney for the son who got himself into the trust after his mother had an 11 on the MOCA, 11 score on the MOCA, okay, won't let the son speak with me directly and is requiring that I put everything in writing to the son. Son's attorney is also accusing me of being biased towards the caregiver daughter who brought the conservatorship and moved here to live with and keep an eye on mom, in quotes, in parentheses, who I actually speak with and provide support to. How would you propose that I structure conducting the assessment? Questions. Should I send son and daughter assessment tools and tailored questions? Should I put a caveat in the report that I was able to speak with sister and others, but I had only communication with the son in writing? Thanks so much, Julie. That's a lot going on.
Well, why don't we, the three of us, do this? Because Buddy's still here. I would say, since you have access to all of them, it's whatever you can get. I mean, if it's only in writing, that's fine. If that's the only way, as long as you have it, as long as the person who is paying you is allowing you to speak to, to both or all three siblings, however many there are. I don't think speaking to them is best, but if you can get it out of writing, that's my opinion. What do you think, Bunny?
Well, I was turning off my soup for half of it, but does it have to do with sorry? Does it have to do with collecting who pays?
Julie, can you say it?
You better skip me. I don't know what the question was. I'm sorry.
Well, whoever signs the contract is the person that essentially, you're reporting to, and so. A lot of times the person who signs the contract will tell you can't speak to like ex-sister. And, that in itself is an ethical dilemma.
The answer, I think, for me, it depends. If it's something that the parent is paying for, say, or the surrogate, the conservator, it's who's signing confidentiality, and I get releases.
Exactly.
And a lot of the work I do, the parties speak to me confidentiality, and once they become, I get permission to make it public. So I think you have to be very, very mindful, but it doesn't matter who pays, or who signs that contract, because even signing, there's confidentiality issues that supersede the money. There may be one person that wants control because they're paying.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, with the HIPAA. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I like that. I like that idea about getting getting the right to make it public.
And assuring them that it's not, like mediation is confidential. I mean, I make sure, because I always talk to the parties before, that they know I'm not going to repeat anything they told me. I just need it, so I understand the context and how far.
Yeah, got it.
Then they have to bring it up, or unless they want to give me permission. I would, you have to be really. That's a whole nother topic, not for me, but for somebody on confidentiality, because it really becomes ethical. And then there's our fiblets that we lie to everybody, and we think it's okay and ethical. So
it's not this. She's saying it's not an issue. Julie is saying that it's not an issue of paying. I think what her questions or her concerns are is in gathering the data for her assessment and how she should categorize, prioritize, who says what, because of this being accused of or being seen as towards the caregiver daughter by including her in her assessment as part of the assessments. Julie, if you can type back if I had that correctly. She's asking if she should put a caveat in her report, her assessment report, because she's writing a report for a plan of care because the daughter is only there temporarily and is going to leave. So when the daughter leaves, they want to implement this plan of care. So her question is, should she put a caveat in the report that she was able to speak with the sisters and others, but can only communicate with the son in writing?
I think that's fine.
Yeah, just be careful you make it clear. If it makes you uncomfortable, that's the sign that you should do it and let them know that you're doing it. You know, the hardest things to ask for are the things you want most. And, you know, I see this on contracts so be really careful, because those are what Cathy said. Those are the ones that are going to sue you. They'll look for one little thing. I told you not to talk to my brother about that I went swimming last week, you know, those are just the more you say up front and the cleaner you are, assume it's going to be public and somebody's going to get mad at you for something if there's any kinds of disagreements.
Right. If they don't like what you say, they will pick it apart big time and sue you.
Or you. And I must say, in whatever years, I have never been sued. And I'm really careful.
Me neither.
I am really careful. And I think that's the first thing for you, protect. And I think that, Cathy, you've said it over and over in this, that if you're dealing with these difficult families, don't do it unless you feel comfortable doing it, because you can get in a lot of trouble, you know,
absolutely. Because I did conservatorships, maybe you did too. You know, I had an attorney all the time, and, you know, I would check it out with the attorney. Because of, you know, the huge risk of suits, because, you know, they're mad at each other, but they're going to come after you. Any other questions?
No other questions, but she says that it is the attorney, I mean, she's a conservative, is the attorney who's now allowing her to speak with the son, that she only can get answers from the son in writing. I would also add that I would put, you know, in terms of when you do write your assessment and plan of care, I always write where I get my source of information from. Everybody needs to be upfront and transparent, unless they tell you not to ahead of time, but you still would include that in your report, right? If you have information that needs to be in a report, you don't have to necessarily say the source, but you would want to include in your report, especially when it comes to her care.
I would always say the source. I would be very, you know, that would be my opinion. I always say the source.
Yeah, I would be transparent that way too as well.
Yeah, no, and I've said this many times, when I taught at San Francisco State in Berkeley in person, I would always bring an elder law attorney in when I went over how to write service notes, because in the end, they're evidence, you know, if they do go to court, and the attorney would actually teach them what they needed legally for it to go to court or to be looked at legally. And that's really important. So I would always put the source. But, you know, I would say always have an attorney. You know, these are like nasty cases.
Julie, I hope I didn't do damage to your questions here, your few questions there.
Julie, I have something I learned. Well, I learned how to do on my computer, because I'm not so good on the computer. But when I do reports for attorneys, I always let them read it first, because I'm not an attorney. And if you go into something, there's a watermark thing on Word that I don't know. Maybe somebody knows computers, but you put draft all over it. So that it's not held against you, and let the attorney be the one that's proofreading for you.
Yeah, I always would have same thing, Bunny. Always had it proofread by the attorney.
But if you put that draft thing, it's very cool. You look like you. You look like you know what you're doing. I just found it out after 80 years, but it's very cool.
That was the last question and comment here, and but I do want to ask Cathy. I said, Cathy, what's coming up here next for our future presentations? What are we looking
like
at?
I said, that I'm going to be doing mostly clinical this year, and I'm going to do death and dying next time. And because it's it's not particularly going to be about COVID, but I think it's really an important module, and so I will let everybody know soon when I'm going to do it, but probably in about 6 weeks. And thank you. You've all been great. It's been totally fun to do it. I'm so glad Bunny's here. And, at some point, maybe Bunny and I will join. Bunny can join Keith because, like I said in the beginning, I'm not the end all know-all. And I will also be getting you a very large bibliography out, as well as as a copy of the webinar.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. Yes, stay safe for sure. And we will see you next time.
Bye. Totally fun.